Hey guys, tonight we begin with the blistering and sand and everything world of the Crusades, a chaotic era where religious fervor, muddy roads, bad armor, and worse decisions collided in spectacular fashion. Whether you were a knight, a peasant, or just someone who owned a donkey, the Crusades were ready to ruin your week and possibly your lifespan. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So you've heard a sermon, a loud, passionate, vaguely threatening sermon delivered by a man in robes shouting about sin, salvation, and how Jerusalem is technically everyone's business. You're not exactly sure where Jerusalem is. Somewhere east of France, south of your pig farm. You nod anyway. Your diet consists entirely of barley, onions, and whatever didn't escape the stew pot. Someone mentions eternal glory, and frankly, that sounds better than milking goats in the rain again. You're wearing worn-out term shoes, soft leather slippers that barely protect you from dew, let alone battlefield conditions. Within the first mile, you've got a blister that's forming its own church council. A nobleman rides past, yelling something vaguely uplifting before vanishing for the day. You were told the army had food. Technically, it does. Practically, it doesn't. Everything is either spoiled, missing, or hoarded by a man named Brother Ulrich, who claims to be fasting for divine clarity while chewing noisily in the shadows. Breakfast is a hunk of bread, so dense you consider using it as a shield. You nod until your jaw gives up. Your neighbor finds a nail in his loaf. No one is shocked. Lunch doesn't exist, only stories of lunch. You nibble a handful of dried peas that taste like ancient regret. One man offers you a fish he's kept in his sock since Tuesday. You decline and reconsider fasting. By afternoon, people are starting to see things. Someone mistakes a scarecrow for a fig tree. Another licks his sword and declares it tastes like glory. It tastes like rust. He now has tetanus. You, meanwhile, trip over a rock, sprain your pride, and get stepped on by a donkey. The sun beats down unbothered. You are not. You're sweating through your tunic, through your armor, through your soul. Your thighs are chafing like they're being punished for something. Your water tastes like old nails and sorrow. And then, just as you're thinking, maybe this isn't so bad, it starts to rain. Not a gentle drizzle of cold, sideways rain that mocks you with every drop. Your surcoat clings like regret. The road becomes a river of mud. You fall twice, once forward, once backward. The goat laughs. By nightfall, you collapse in a wet field beside a stranger whose snoring might be weaponized. You sleep like a dropped rock poorly, and with consequences. And then there's the surcoat, the brightly colored fabric worn over armor to declare your cause. Yours is white, or it was. Now it's a mystery of beige blotches, and it flaps around like a damp banner of regrets. Supply lines stretch endlessly, interrupted by terrain, theft, and local peasants who understandably don't want their granaries emptied. You forage. You find berries. Gerald says they're edible. Gerald also once ate a candle. You eat them anyway. You spend the next hours reflecting behind a tree and questioning your life choices. Dinner arrives in the form of stew, delightful, mysterious stew. No one knows what's in it, and everyone eats it anyway. You find something chewy. The red cross painted on, it looks like it was done by someone who specializes in hog branding. Uniformity doesn't exist in this army. One man wears full mail. Another has a pot on his head. Gerald, again, is shirtless and wielding a wooden shield he carved himself. It says, "Jesus watch this," in Latin, so poor it might be a crime. You try to tie your belt, but pull too tight and nearly pass out. Your sword, if you're lucky enough to have borrowed one, is dull, badly balanced, and seems to resent your very existence. And yet you tell yourself, I look like a knight. You don't. You look like a nervous vegetable wrapped in clanking hope. But it's too late. You're packed, dressed, and dangerously unready. So you sign up, or rather, you get roped in during a tavern conversation that escalates into a holy oath after 3 mugs of weak ale and a misplaced sense of invincibility. This is a slow, aching shuffle across half a continent, with thousands of underfed souls dragging their hopes and carts and goats behind them. Someone even brought a piano. Everyone's armed, though most of it wasn't designed for warfare. One man wields a pitchfork like a banner of destiny. Another has tied a hammer to a broomstick and calls it God's toothpick. You've only gone a few miles, and your shoulders already feel like they re-screaming in Latin. The chainmail rubs your neck raw. Your shoes have declared war on your toes. Your pack containing 2 onions and a stale biscuit is heavier than your regrets. Someone sneezes behind you, and you consider turning back for good. You wake up the next morning hungover, holding a wooden cross and someone else's boots. Still, you feel proud. You're now officially a crusader. You've got a patch sewn onto your tunic, a blessing from a priest, and the vague idea that all of this will end with you being showered in gold and gratitude. You've also been given exactly no military training, no map, and your armor? You don't have any. You were told to bring what you can. So now you're armed with a kitchen knife, a frying pan, and whatever's left of your dignity. Your neighbor Gerald brought a rake and a really aggressive attitude. You tell your family you're leaving in the name of God. They ask if God will be feeding you along the way. You laugh. You shouldn't have. The Pope himself has declared that anyone who joins the crusade will receive full forgiveness of sins. That sounds like a good deal, especially after what you did last spring behind the mill house. You didn't think God saw that, but apparently he keeps receipts. Also, let's be honest, you're bored. You've plowed the same field for 14 years. Because you are now part of one of the most disorganized, poorly planned mass movements in human history. You're marching thousands of miles with no logistics, no reliable supply line, and more spiritual confidence than common sense. And you haven't even left your village yet. But hey, what could possibly go wrong? Before you even step out of your village, someone hands you a chainmail shirt that smells like it lost a bet. You were promised armor noble, shining, heroic. What you get is a hand-me-down iron sweater with rust stains, sweat stains, and a lingering scent of disappointment. It's heavy, not, oh, this is a bit bulky, heavy. We're talking this dash is a wearable blacksmith shop heavy. Just putting it on feels like being hugged by a grumpy anvil. You've also received a helmet, conical, dented, and clearly designed by someone who resented skulls. There's no padding inside, just cold metal and the gentle sensation of your head being slow cooked. For your legs, you get wool. Just wool. There are no armored greaves unless you're wealthy or exceptionally lucky. You are neither. You wrap your legs like a sad present and hope it absorbs some of the pain from the thousands of stones you're about to meet. And footwear? If you were dreaming of hardened leather boots and heroic striding, forget it. Time to march. The trumpets sound, or maybe it's just a man yelling, and the crusade begins. Very slowly, very uncomfortably. This isn't a glorious charge. And the noise, there's so much noise. Chattering, bickering, praying, grumbling. By the 4th day, your stomach begins to sing not a song of joy, but of despair. Feeding this chaotic pilgrimage is a logistical fantasy at best. You do not ask questions. Someone claims it's rabbit. Someone else says boot. Both are plausible. By nightfall, you're full not of food, just of regret. Hygiene, once a noble concept, has now been demoted to the realm of legend, alongside dragons and dry socks. Bathing is a luxury for nobles and hallucinations. Your clothes no longer resemble fabric. They are battlefields in cotton form. Your undergarments have fused with your skin like ancient armor. Your boots are no longer footwear, but angry, sentient creatures plotting against your toes. You dream of bread that doesn't to fight back, and cheese that doesn't agree on purpose. Fall ill, and you'll be met with prayer, leeches, or a dismissive wave. None of it works. Healers try their best with what they have. Cloth, roots, maybe conviction. One burns herbs. Another waves them dramatically, like scaring illness away with interpretive incense. The math between your last bath and your chances of survival doesn't add up. And the worst part? You haven't even fought anyone yet. No swords, no glory, no noble clashes, just a slow-motion defeat by germs and goat stew. A child hurls a turnip at your face with such precision, you wonder if they've been training for this. Your crosses mean nothing. Your presence is a problem. He's given wine vague promises and gestures confidently before disappearing by morning. At one point, the army is marching sideways like confused lobsters. Morale dips. And just when you think you've hit the bottom, someone mutters, "I think we took a wrong turn." And there it is, the final nail in the morale coffin. One man says he knows the way from a dream. Gerald insists he's being led by the wind. The wind you suspect is mocking you. You cross the same creek thrice in one day. Someone insists it's different. It's holier. You are not convinced. Other crusading groups have already soured the mood with theft, shouting, and fires. You are not a holy guest. You are a noisy, smelly interruption to their lives. Symptoms become stories. Fever, chills, swelling, a feeling that your liver just resigned. East, probably. Maybe. No one knows exactly. Your commander has a map that looks more like a child's dream. 3 rivers, 2 towns, and a dragon doodled in the corner. Confidence outweighs competence. Every road is the right road until it isn't. Someone is cured with a red-hot poker. You immediately pretend to feel better. A sniffle becomes a cough. The cough becomes a chorus. Someone vomits into a bush. It's politely ignored. By the next morning, Gerald has sprouted something suspiciously purple. He claims it's just heat rash. You begin making funeral plans. Maybe your own footprints from yesterday. It doesn't matter now. You've committed. Onward you go, driven by divine purpose, stale bread, and the sheer human refusal to admit that no one has any idea where you're going. You've never missed your mother's onion soup more, and it's only day 4, already claimed by a man crying into his own trousers. You fill your flask from a peaceful brook and moments later watch horses upstream desecrated thoroughly. You drink it anyway. What is life without risk? The priests call it a divine test. The knights blame the devil. A passing barmaid says it's because no one washes their hands. She's ignored, naturally. You attempt to request water and somehow demand someone's daughter. You try to explain your holy quest and accidentally propose to a goat. The goat is unimpressed. Occasionally, you're allowed in, but only after long negotiations, side eyes, and warnings about your scent. You buy bread that feels like stone and ale that peels paint. Directions to Jerusalem are vague and optimistic. 2 days later, you realize you've been sent in a loop again. You are not clean, not even close. You are crusade clean. And it turns out, the real enemies are bacteria and Gerald's cough, which now echoes like prophecy. The welcome is less than warm. Villagers peek from windows, clutching their livestock and hopes. Gates remain shut. Crosses are drawn in the air. One monk throws a cabbage in tribute if you agree to leave faster. Welcome to the actual crusade, surviving your fellow crusaders and their medieval immune systems. You nod in solidarity and retreat into your funk. Privacy is a faded memory. You and strangers have now shared glances during events. Deep, unspoken bonds of shame are formed behind bushes and under carts. One man, whose name no one knows, remains impossibly clean. His armor shines. His face glows. He smells of lavender and judgment. He might be divine or a mirage. Either way, you resent him with quiet, passive aggression. At this point in the journey, it's official. You smell like wet iron shame, and something unspoken that's probably growing. There is no soap. Anyone who says they have soap is either lying, delusional, or carrying a bar made from lard and false hope. Water, when found, is rationed for drinking or hurling onto open wounds while wincing. Cleaning your body with it is not a priority. Pain, thirst, and communal suffering come first. Lice have moved in permanently. You've tried diplomacy. They remain unmoved. You name a few out of familiarity. Gerald names his after saints. Someone swears one is whispering Latin. It becomes routine. Itch, groan, march, repeat. You consider bathing in a stream. It's freezing, murky. You begin to dream not of home or heaven, but of bathtubs, dry socks, and breezes that don't smell like soup and men. Medicine, such as it is, lies somewhere between folklore and experimental dance. Tents become infirmaries, sad, whispered spaces where hope fades to raspy breaths. Sanitation is theoretical. Fields become toilets. Water sources are war zones. You try to avoid the sick until you realize you are the sick. Your throat burns. Your stomach stutters. And still you march, itchy, aching, semi-fermented. Towns appear on the horizon like salvation, but they see you coming long before you arrive. Language barriers offer no reprieve. Entering foreign lands doesn't help. There, you are not just unwelcome. You are deeply problematic. And yet, onward you go, because somehow, despite the madness, the chaos, and the constant chafing, the journey continues. You occasionally acquire a guide. The landscape changes hourly. Forests, bogs, slopes that laugh at your boots. No one wants to admit they're lost. So you march with confidence and absolutely no direction. Maybe you'll find Jerusalem. Maybe another goat village. You thought it would be glorious. You do not ask questions. Someone claims it's rabbit someone else says boodle. Both are plausible by nightfall. You full not of food, just of regret. You dream of bread that doesn't fight back and cheese that isn't green on purpose. You then never missed your mother as onion soup more. And it is only day 4 at this point in the journey. It is official. You smell like a combination of wet iron regret and something you hope is anfungal. Goal has now been demoted to a vague memory, like clean socks or personal boundaries. You haven't bathed in over a week. Neither has anyone else. You know this because the entire crusading force has started to develop what historians call a strong collective aroma. You all one big walking cheese wheel of sweat. Dust and medieval body odor. There is no soap. If someone claims they have soap, they're lying, or they've carved it from tallow and self-D. Delusion. You do have water occasionally, but it is mostly reserved for drinking or pouring on. Then gossip at a monastery. It starts innocently enough. A sniffle here, a cough there. Someone throws up behind a bush. Everyone pretends not to notice. By the next day, 5 more are coughing Gerald and Hope. You improve out of sheer awkwardness, and the symptoms are not subtle fever chills. Nausea, swelling, and a general sensation that your organs have gone on strike. You try to be brave. Then you see someone being cured with a hot poker and decide you're suddenly feeling much better. Actually, sanitation is shall we. You've been marching for days, hungry, itchy, mildly diseased, and now you're expecting a warm welcome from the towns and villages along the way. Spoiler, you won't get it. The locals are less than thrilled. In fact, they look at your crusading party the same way a shepherd looks at wolves wearing crosses, suspicious tents, ready to hide the livestock. The villagers bar the gates. The local bishop peeks out from a tower and makes the sign of the cross on you. A monk offers a single cabbage in exchange for you, leaving faster language barriers. Don't help you try asking for water, but accidentally demand someone Swife, you attempt to explain your holy mission and somehow end up proposing to a goat. The goat is not interested. Negotiations break down quickly. If you do manage to get inside a settlement, it asks from their point of view. You re a moving catastrophe, thousands of unwashed strangers, shouting and broken. You cross the same stream. 3 times in one day, you pass a rock. You re pretty sure you already passed a monk. Insists it has a different rock. This one is holier. You remain unconvinced. The terrain changes constantly, forest, swamp, mountains. One stretch of road is so steep, your boots slide more than they step. Half the army is now walking sideways like confused. Crab spirits are low, feet are lower. And then someone says the worst thing imaginable. I think we took a wrong turn. And ale that doubles as varnish. Someone gives you directions to Jerusalem. You follow them for 2 days before realizing they were just trying to send you to the next village kind of pastry, and no one wants to admit they re-lost. So you keep marching proudly, aimlessly, faithfully, every direction leads. Somewhere, whether it's Jerusalem, a Byzantine outpost, or another unfortunate goat village, is anyone's guess, but onward you go, fueled by divine purpose, stale bread, and the collective refusal to admit you re-walking in a very large circle. You thought it would be glorious. And if you in foreign territory, oh, it gets even better. The locals doing just dislike you. They actively want you gone. They don't care about your papal blessings or your homemade flag. They just want their goats, fields, and general peace. Back and considering some of Latin trampling crops, borrowing everything that is nailed down and singing war hymns at midnight. Who swore they were just passing through trust is at an all-time low. In one town, a child throws a turnip at your head. It's the most accurate projectile you've seen. All week you came seeking salvation. They see you as a broke, heavily armed tourist with boundary in the corner. You suspect the artist had a vivid imagination and poor geography skills still. The commander waves it around like it's the word of God and yells forward at every fork in the road. Confidence apparently is more important than accuracy every now. And then a local guide is recruited. He is offered a few coins, a goat skin of wine, and a vague promise not to be trampled. He nods sagely, points east, and then vanishes before breakfast. You beginning to think east just means not here. One guy swears he remembers the way from a dream. Issues and honestly, they not wrong. So you finally on the move again. Marching east, probably, maybe, the truth is no one is actually sure where they going. There are no GPS devices, no road signs that say this way to Jerusalem, and most of the people in your group think the Holy Land is just slightly past Constantinople, which they also has developed something alarming and purple on his neck. He insists it's just a heat rash. You begin planning your own funeral tents, quickly becoming infirmaries, or as they know around the Crusade places, where hope goes to wheeze quietly. To spot 3 horses upstream, using it as a toilet, you drink it anyway. Hydration is hydration. The priests say it as a test from God. The knights say it's the devil. The barmaid who tagged along for some reason says it's because no one ever washes their hands. She is immediately ignored. Obviously, you try to keep your distance from the sick until you realize everyone is sick, including you. Your throat burns, your stomach is sending mixed messages. You consider your chances of survival and remember your last bath was last month. The healers are overwhelmed. Their main tools are cloth bandages, leeches, and conviction. Sometimes they burn herbs, sometimes they just wave them open wounds while screaming, washing your body with it. That is a luxury reserved for nobles and people with significantly fewer blisters. Your clothes, once proudly stitched with a red cross, now resemble a battlefield in fabric form. Your undergarments have fused to your skin. In certain areas, your boots are damp, possibly alive, and definitely angry. Lice, oh yes, they've moved in you. Name them, you try negotiating with them. They are winning one night, is convinced his helmet has haunted it. It's just headlights throwing a party. You start itching at night. Everyone does. It becomes the unofficial marching rhythm. Scratch, scratch, shuffle, groan. You briefly consider bathing in a river. You approach the water and realize It is freezing, filthy, and already occupied by someone crying into their hygiene once a noble underpants you. Nod respectfully and walk away, and bodily functions. There are no latrines. You go where you can, behind bushes, under wagons, or just wherever dignity officially gives up privacy. Absolutely not. You now have eye contact stories with strangers. You'll never forget. There is one guy, nobody knows his name, who somehow manages to remain clean. His armor gleams. His face is clear. He smells like lavender. He is either a miracle or a hallucination. Either way, you hate him deeply. You start to dream of soap, of bathtubs, of dry feet. But mostly you dream of a breeze that doesn't smell like 30 men and one. Regrettable stew. You re-not clean. You re-not even close your crusade clean. You thought enemies with swords were your biggest problem. Nope, it asked the guy 3 rows back who just coughed something biblical into the air. Welcome to the real crusade. Surviving your fellow crusaders' immune systems. Medieval medicine is less science and more interpretive dance with herbs. If you fall ill, you can expect one of 3 treatments: prayer, bleeding, or being told to walk it off. Spoiler, none of these work, especially when what you've got is spreading faster near your face. Say theoretical waste disposal, random fields. Water questionable at best, weaponized at worst. You refill your flask from a stream. Only math is not in your favor. And the worst part, you still haven't fought anyone yet. You re-losing a war to soup germs tea, like tone-deaf demons. You not a holy army. You a walking plague parade. You stop at a town hoping to trade for food. Usually followed by price, gouging, staring, and someone making passive-aggressive comments about your odor. You buy bread that is older than your shoes. These places were recently raided by other crusading parties. Can't find your commander has a map sort of it, as a hand-drawn scroll with 3 towns, 2 rivers, and what appears to be a dragon. Another says he read a scroll once. Gerald, still shirtless and increasingly sunburned, claims he's following divine whispers carried by the wind. The wind seems to be saying, you lost. You hundreds of miles from home, surrounded by people who think geography is a... You imagine banners waving swords, clashing with poetic timing, and your enemies falling in choreographed heaps, like a troubadour epic. What you actually get is dirt in your mouth, noise in your soul, and a deeply unsettling realization that no one knows what they're doing. The first thing you notice is the screaming. Spoiler, he's not. You try to raise your shield and realize it's on the ground behind you because Gerald borrowed it to cook bacon and forgot to give it back. Someone gets trampled by his own horse. Someone else is fighting with a frying pan. You see a man trip, stab himself in the foot, and start blaming the devil. Honestly, he might be right. Not just from the enemy, not just from your side. From everyone. The survivors crawl away, panting, bruised, and smelling like old stew and bad choices. You're one of them, you included. You consider actually being dead. It is a full-blown enemy commander with better timing than your entire army. Both are tempting. You sweat through your clothes, your armor, and your soul. Your leather boots sizzle against your skin. Not English drizzle. This is biblical, angry, vengeful, thunder screaming from the sky kind of rain. You slip twice. Gerald slips 3 times. Once face first into a cow patty. You don't laugh out loud, but your soul chuckles. The skies darken and suddenly rain. A nearby knight claims he saw a mirage of a tavern. You fail, repeatedly. The only thing drier than the wood is your morale. You believe him. You saw it too. You both cry quietly. You try to find shelter under a tree, which turns out to be the preferred hangout of 3 equally soaked goats. Oh, the cold. Once the sun disappears, the desert flips its mood like a drunk baron at a feast. You go from sweating in your boots to shivering like a cursed tambourine. Your fingers stop working. Your sword now doubles as an ice sculpture. Your nose runs away from your face and joins another army, and one man who has given up entirely and is now reciting psalms to his knees. There's battle strategy, of course, but it mostly involves yelling charge and hoping the other guy is more confused than you are. Your helmet blocks your vision. Your sword is too heavy. Archers fire before anyone's ready. The front line surges forward, while the back line panics and surges back. You're not just fighting for the faith. You're fighting the entire atmosphere. And the atmosphere is winning. It's unclear if this is intimidation or madness. Either way, it's working. You run toward the chaos because everyone else is doing it and social pressure is powerful. Dust fills the air. You swing wildly. You don't remember how. And in the Crusades, that's about as close to victory as most people ever get. Gerald has your helmet now. He's using it as a soup bowl. You hit a helmet. It's your own. You scream. It's very brave. The enemy is fast, skilled, loud. You lock eyes with one and realize, horrifyingly, he's about 15 and significantly more experienced than you. You consider playing dead. There are horns blowing, commands shouted in 5 different languages, and someone singing what sounds like a tavern song about sheep. After a while, and you have no idea how long the noise subsides. Somehow you're bleeding from the ankle. So was it glorious? Not exactly, but you're alive. The weather in the Holy Land, or more accurately, the long winding disaster parade to the Holy Land, is not your friend. It's not even an indifferent acquaintance. One moment it says sweltering, the kind of heat that makes your chainmail feel like a cast iron oven designed by Satan. Then, just when you've accepted your fate as a roast pilgrim, the heavens shift. Clouds roll in like an angry bishop. Not polite rain. Your surcoat clings to your body like a wet shroud. Your feet squelch with every step, making you sound like a remorseful duck. Your tent collapses almost immediately. The roads dissolve into mud. And the cold. You think about building a fire. But hey, weather builds character, right? Unfortunately, character doesn't stop you from catching pneumonia while trying to scrape mud off your own eyebrow with a broken spoon. Welcome to crusading. People who clearly don't want you there. So naturally, the order is given lay siege. It sounds glorious in theory. In practice, it's medieval camping with weapons. And far more diarrhea than you'd imagined. Your army sets up outside the city, just out of arrow range, you hope, and settles in for what could be days, weeks, or the rest of your natural life. Morale is at an all-time low mostly, because someone tried to play the lute last night, and it sounded like a goat drowning in wine. The plan is simple. Wait them out. You just forgot to bring food, sanitation, siege engines, or literally anything useful. You climb 2 rungs, scream, fall off, and land on someone who is just about to surrender anyway. The assault fails. Everyone pretends it was just probing the defenses. The local priest says the odor is a test of faith. You think it's more of a biohazard. Supplies dwindle. Arguments flare. You rush forward, heart pounding, sword drawn, and immediately trip on rubble. Someone steps on your back. You thank them out of habit. Everyone's looting, shouting, or dramatically dying in corners. A knight gallops past carrying a chandelier. Gerald has found a barrel of wine and is now declaring himself lord of the alleyway. You lose your footing, your helmet, and at one point, your temper against a stubborn door. At one point, someone suggests eating the mascot goat. A fistfight breaks out. What it looks like is a holy yard sale hosted by chaos itself. Secured, which here means still smoldering and mostly robbed, you stand in the rubble wondering, was this the plan? There's no clear chain of command anymore. Your noble commander is too busy posing for paintings that don't exist. You also now possess a goblet, a tapestry you can't carry, and someone's extremely confused cat. I've seen the world and grown as a person kind of way. No, you're thinner, dirtier, somehow both older and younger all at once. You've aged 15 years in your soul, but still get yelled at like a child by someone whose only qualification is owning a fancier hat. You're standing in a place full of crying civilians and broken doors, trying to remember whether this was about salvation or plunder. You'll smile and say, incredible, because deeply chaotic, morally confusing, and constantly damp doesn't fit well in a tavern tale. You might even polish the relics you stole, mount them on a wall, and pretend you knew what you were doing the whole time. Your armor doesn't fit right anymore. Your body shaped itself around every bruise, every night spent curled up like a wet pretzel in a leaking tent. Your sword is nicked. Your faith is complicated. The line has blurred. The priests are yelling Dies Vult while shoving relics into their robes. One man insists he's found the Holy Grail. You'll avoid looking goats in the eye. It's a soup bowl with a dent in it. The goat wins. Someone tries to build a catapult. It collapses instantly. You survive the marching, starvation, siege, illness, arrows, Gerald, and the occasional divine misunderstanding. Yvette technically won, but now you, re-sitting on a broken crate in a city you helped destroy, trying to remember what your life was like before you joined a holy war run by amateurs with swords and untreated fevers. A battering ram's fashioned from a tree, 4 ropes, and sheer enthusiasm. It lasts 10 minutes before being set on fire by defenders who are clearly much better at this. You dig trenches. You build towers. You complain a lot. Then you notice the people inside the city are doing just fine, waving at you from high walls, munching olives, and occasionally throwing insults. And possibly waste over the side. It rains. Everything turns to mud. Your socks dissolve. Your tent leaks. Your stew tastes like rope and betrayal. Gerald catches a rat and names it dinner. They're about boredom, bad smells, and desperately trying to remember why you came here at all. The gates are open. Whether from starvation, sabotage, or divine scheduling, the city walls have finally been breached. You expect trumpets, glory, maybe a chorus of angels. And then there's the smell. Thousands of unwashed soldiers, rotting food, the occasional dead horse. A scent could peel paint off a relic. Eventually, you try to storm the walls. Ladders are thrown up. Arrows come down. Weeks pass. Sieges, you realize, aren't about glory. One morning, the sun rises a little more dramatically than usual, and you hear a sound echoing through camp. Instead, you get chaos. The charge into the city is less noble procession, more stampede of sweaty, half-mad lunatics with weapons and a vendetta against architecture. Inside, it's smoke and screaming. No one can tell who's who. You were told this was a holy war. As the dust settles, and the city is, you find a relic. You think it's a toe bone. Could be holy, could be chicken. Either way, it's going in your bag. But the victory feels strange. You expect it to feel righteous, glorious. Instead, you mostly feel tired, sticky, and slightly guilty. A priest pats your shoulder and says, "Asterisk, God is pleased." You nod, but you're not so sure. You came seeking heaven. You got ash, noise, and Gerald throwing up on a relic. You made it. You've changed, and not in the inspiring. You've developed a twitch whenever someone says the word pilgrimage. You used to believe in clear lines, good and evil, saved and damned. Now you mostly believe in strong shoes, and not eating anything that's still moving. Back home, they'll call you a hero. They'll ask what it was like. You'll nod solemnly during sermons. But deep down, you'll always carry the truth. You didn't crusade. You survived a traveling disaster with a cross on top. Gerald will write poetry, badly. Someone will start a cult. You'll quietly donate to the nearest monastery And never speak of the time you mistook a Bishop S hat for a stew pot. Was it worth it? History will say yes. You might say yes. But the twitch in your left eye still says, probably not. Where martial arts met military engineering. To the Roman mind, violence was not just entertainment. It was art, politics, and power rolled into one. Gladiators were not simple brutes. They were conditioned, categorized, and crafted like weapons. Each trained in a distinct fighting style with a specific set of techniques based on their gear and role in combat. The secutor carried a short sword and heavy shield, bred to chase and crush with unrelenting pressure. Every move was calculated, every weakness studied and known. They learned to read the rhythm of an opponent's breath, how to feint, when to strike, and how to do so when the crowd least expected it. The goal wasn't just to kill it, was to captivate, to entertain through mastery. At the core of this system were the Lannister ruthless combat instructors who ran the ludus like modern fight camps, only much harsher. Its name was Kalera too, and it wasn't just a martial art, it was a sacred practice, a warrior's yoga, and a living theater passed down through generations. With legends tying its origin to the mythical sage Parasurama, a warrior saint said to have carved the land of Kerala from the sea. Training began in the Kalari, a sunken dirt pit that served both as a dojo and a sacred temple. When weapons were finally introduced, it marked a deep rite of passage. Among them, the Urumi stood out a flexible whip sword that coils around the body like a ribbon of steel. Terrifying, exotic, and poetic, one wrong move with the Urumi could injure the wielder themselves. Mastery required absolute focus and unwavering control. It was a philosophy in motion. A bald monk stands in silent meditation, surrounded by flickering candlelight. Legend says he found the monks physically weak, unable to endure the rigors of long meditation. So he taught them a set of exercises part Qi Gong, part self-defense, that evolved into the foundation of Shaolin Kung Fu. Then, with a single breath, he explodes into motion fists whipping through the air, body twisting in fluid strikes. This is Shaolin Kung Fu, where martial arts became a spiritual path, and fighting transformed into a form of prayer, a dance of death. They mimicked the movements of animals: tiger, crane, snake, leopard, and dragon. It spread across Asia, influencing Japanese karate, Korean taekwondo, and the global martial imagination. From Bruce Lee to cinema, Shaolin's echo continues to resonate. Each style had a rhythm, a personality. The tiger crushed, the crane evaded, the snake flowed, the dragon transformed, a hymn to life. A punch was not just a blow, it was clarity made manifest. A block was not resistance, it was redirection, a surrender to flow. Here, barefoot students learned to move like animals. The stance of the horse, the leap of the lion, the strike of the snake. Every motion was a meditation in motion, linked to breath, rhythm, and inner energy. For decades, it went underground hidden, but never extinguished. Like the Urumi itself, it coiled in silence, waiting. So feared were their skills that emperors would alternately revere and suppress them. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, they were both guardians and targets. When it returned, it flowed again, lethal, elegant, eternal. But even without the myths, it is one of the oldest surviving combat systems in the world, and arguably one of the most graceful. One of the most iconic tools was the gun staff, the grandfather of all weapons. Monks were also taught to turn everyday tools into instruments of defense, because Shaolin Kung Fu was never about conquest. It was about protection of the temple, of the innocent, of the spirit. The Rishieris fought with a net and trident, relying on speed and the ability to entangle and disable. It wasn't sport, it was spectacle. And every arena was a battlefield, where ancient martial tradition was written in sweat, sand, and blood. Gladiators, many of them slaves or prisoners of war, endured punishing routines. grueling strength drills, sparring matches, and mock battles with wooden weapons. Their bodies were molded into weapons of war, not for the battlefield, but for the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum. Practitioners were taught Ayurveda, the ancient science of healing, to mend what they might break. They studied marmon pressure points believed to regulate life energy. Combat was not about destruction, but balance. Even in the heart of battle, the art emphasized restraint, timing, and inner calm traits, more of a warrior sage than a killer. And make no mistake, this was martial arts. The gladius, from which the word gladiator comes, was a short thrusting sword perfected through centuries of Roman military evolution. Others earned their freedom through victory, rising from oppression to become celebrities of their age, idolized for their bravery, their skill, their grace under pressure. These fighters were taught precise angles of attack, disciplined footwork, and a keen sense of distance control. But it wasn't all cruelty. Some gladiators became legends like Spartacus, a former soldier turned rebel leader who escaped the ludus at Capua and nearly toppled the Roman Republic. Roman martial training was ruthless but systematic. It stripped men of everything, then rebuilt them as fighters whose very survival depended on discipline, technique, and unbreakable endurance. Long before Kung Fu dazzled the world or Judo became an Olympic sport, a hidden martial tradition thrived in the lush southern lands of India. Often called the mother of all martial arts, Kalaripayattu traces its roots back over 3,000 years. Where Roman training emphasized brute force, Kalaripayattu prioritized fluidity, grace, and a connection between movement and spirit. Before ever touching a weapon, students spent years mastering body control, dynamic kicks, palm strikes, and balance. But Kalaripayattu's uniqueness wasn't just in its movements, it was in its philosophy. By the time colonial powers arrived, Kalaripayattu had evolved into a symbol of native resistance. Fearing rebellion, the British banned it. Kalaripayattu wasn't just a martial art. Picture this: a misty temple nestled in the mountains of Hunan, China. The roots of Shaolin martial arts stretch back to the 5th century CE, when an Indian monk named Bodhidharma arrived at the Shaolin temple. But this wasn't just about physical strength. At Shaolin, every motion carried meaning. Every strike held intention. The mind and body were one. Zen Buddhism, the soul of Shaolin, taught non-attachment even in battle. To fight with anger was to lose. True mastery meant overcoming the self. Training was rigorous. Monks practiced stances until their legs quaked, struck trees to condition their limbs, balanced on narrow poles to sharpen focus. Weapons training was equally demanding. Staffs, swords, spears, and even chains became extensions of the body. Over time, Shaolin monks gained legendary status. They fended off bandits, resisted invading armies, and inspired entire rebel movements. Despite temple burnings and persecution, the spirit of Shaolin endured. Shaolin Kung Fu was more than combat. It was enlightenment in motion, a sacred choreography of discipline, devotion, and inner strength. Especially in the Tokugawa era, martial prowess took a more philosophical turn. Schools of swordsmanship emphasized mental clarity, posture, and presence over brute strength. The greatest masters, like Miyamoto Musashi, wrote treatises blending combat technique with Zen thought. His Book of 5 Rings remains a cornerstone of martial philosophy to this day. In time, the age of the samurai faded, but their martial traditions lived on, morphing into modern kendo, aikido, and even influencing business ethics in Japan today. The samurai spirit survives not just in dojos, but in literature, film, and the quiet discipline of those who still walk the warrior's path. In Angola was a fluid, acrobatic martial art rooted in dance and ritual. War dances served dual purposes: to intimidate enemies and to psych up the body. Movements mimicked animals, spirits, or ancestors. Today, across African villages and modern gyms alike, These arts are making a quiet comeback, not just as fighting systems, but as cultural treasures. African martial arts remind us that the warrior's path is not defined by fame, but by resilience, community, and memory. Combat wasn't just a physical act. It was a connection to heritage, identity, and the divine. With spinning kicks and evasive movements, it resembled a graceful battle. And it didn't stay in Angola. They also used holmganger, a formalized duel that settled disputes with honor. These one-on-one battles weren't just about strength. They tested composure, nerve, and technique. Enslaved Africans carried angolo across the Atlantic, where it evolved into capoeira in Brazil, one of the world's most unique martial arts. The Vikings weren't barbarians. They were craftsmen of chaos, forging victory with steel, sweat, and an unshakable belief in their gods. Warriors believed that Odin, the god of war and wisdom, watched their battles. This belief didn't just glorify war. It shaped how Norse warriors fought. Fearless, relentless, focused. To retreat was to forfeit paradise. To stand your ground meant eternal glory. Unlike modern Olympic-style wrestling, this was both a sport and a rite of passage. Fighters were taught to purify, not just the body, but the soul. Strength without humility was weakness. Victory without compassion was disgrace. Matches were intense and technical, with an emphasis on throws, leverage, and spiritual humility. Winning wasn't enough. A true Palaven had to be generous in victory, respectful in defeat. The berserkers, infamous for fighting in trance-like fury, were said to channel animal spirits, bear, wolf, or boar, through ritual and intoxication. Whether real or myth, the berserker legend reveals the spiritual edge of Viking warfare. During periods of foreign occupation, especially under Arab and Mongol rule, the Zerkine became a covert center of resistance. Modern practitioners may wear track pants instead of loincloths, but the spirit remains. They were blueprints for how to live, how to die, and how to carry oneself with purpose. And even though empires have crumbled and swords have rusted, their echoes still resonate in the modern world. In Persia, the strongest warrior wasn't the one who struck the hardest. It was the one who trained hardest, lived nobly, and lifted others with every step. Persian identity and pride were preserved in sweat and song, and martial practice became a symbol of cultural defiance. But behind the Hollywood chaos was a cold, calculated system of martial training rooted in survival, discipline, and brutal efficiency. The Norse weren't just raiders. They were trained warriors with a deep respect for combat and a mythology that made dying with a sword in hand the highest honor. Practitioners, barefoot and bare-chested, performed choreographed movements to the rhythmic beat of a drum and the chant of the Morsht, a spiritual singer coach. Exercises included spinning clubs, lifting heavy shields, and swinging iron bows, all designed to build explosive power and flexibility. Think of it as ancient CrossFit infused with poetry and prayer. But across the vast and diverse African continent, ancient warrior traditions flourished, fierce, complex, and largely overlooked by mainstream history. They trained to become righteous men. Here, martial arts met spirituality and national identity in one of the oldest continuously practiced warrior traditions in the world. At its core is Palavani, a system that combines strength training, wrestling, and combat drills with religious and ethical instruction. The word Palaven means not just champion, but a noble warrior, one who defends the weak and upholds justice. Warriors wielded long polished sticks in high-stakes bouts that could end in bloodied faces or shattered bones. But these weren't mindless brawls. Down the duels were a rite of passage, a test of manhood, strength, and even courtship. Winning meant status, respect, and sometimes the attention of potential wives. Training happened in longhouses, clearings, and on frozen battlefields. Young Norse boys were raised with one purpose: to become strong enough to defend their clan, conquer new lands, and earn a name worthy of the sagas. From stick fighting in Ethiopia to the Nguni spear dances of southern Africa, these were combat arts born not from textbooks, but from lived experience, survival, and deep cultural roots. The sword, axe, and spear were the primary tools of Viking warfare. While their short swords were useful for close combat, it was the bearded axe, versatile, heavy, and terrifying, that became their trademark. Vikings learned how to hook shields, disarm opponents, and land killing blows with ruthless precision. There was no style for style's sake. Every move had one purpose: end the fight. For the samurai, martial arts were not about victory. They were about becoming worthy of the sword you carried. When people think of martial arts, they often jump straight to Asia or Rome. In Ethiopia, Morsi and Suri tribes practiced danga, or stick fighting, a brutal but highly ritualized form of dueling. Further south in the Zulu lands, martial prowess was elevated to a national ethos under Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century. Traditional stick fighting, called Induku, evolved into full-fledged battlefield tactics. Shaka revolutionized African warfare by replacing throwing spears with short stabbing spears, training warriors in close combat formations. His MP regiments practiced disciplined charges, feints, and encirclement maneuvers. Their footwork, shield work, and group coordination rivaled anything seen in Roman legions. But these African martial traditions weren't just about fighting. They were deeply embedded in culture. Throughout Africa, warriors also used rhythm, music, and performance in their training. Though many of these traditions were suppressed during colonial rule, they never disappeared. When you think of Vikings, you might picture horned helmets, historically inaccurate, wild beards, and blood-soaked raids. Viking martial arts didn't take place in polished dojos or elegant temples. Combat training started early, using wooden weapons for drills and eventually progressing to steel. But make no mistake, Viking combat wasn't mindless brawling. It was strategic, often involving tight shield walls, coordinated attacks, and feints designed to confuse the enemy. Beyond the physical, Viking martial discipline was deeply intertwined with mythology. And then there was Valhalla, the promised afterlife for those who died bravely in battle. Though Viking martial systems lacked formal documentation, their methods echo in modern reenactment groups and historical combat schools. In the heart of ancient Persia, beneath the domed roofs of the Zerkene, the House of Strength warriors didn't just train to fight. Varzeshi Palavani, this Persian martial art, has roots stretching back over 2,000 years to the Achaemenid and Sassanid empires. Training took place in the Zerkene, a sacred gym where rituals mattered as much as reps. But the true heart of the system was Koshti Palavani Persian wrestling. Philosophically, Palavani borrowed heavily from Sufism and Zoroastrianism. In this sense, the Zerkene was more than a gym, it was a moral forge. Today, Varzeshi Palavani still survives, officially recognized by UNESCO as a piece of intangible cultural heritage. From the dusty tombs of Egypt to the mountainous temples of Shaolin, from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the sun-baked Zerkenes of Iran, ancient martial arts were never just about war. And slaves, though moralists like Seneca, often scolded this fragrant excess wigs and hairpieces, were a booming industry. Blonde wigs, especially ones made from Germanic slave hair, were fashionable among Roman elites. Here, where some of the world's earliest civilizations blossomed, cosmetics weren't just tools for seduction or status. They were amulets against misfortune, expressions of piety, and even ingredients in rituals of transformation. Mesopotamian women and men placed enormous importance on grooming. Scented oils and balms were central to daily life. Mesopotamian women oiled their hair to keep it shiny and manageable, braiding it into elaborate patterns or twisting it into buns, often adorned with ribbons, beads, or bronze pins. A spell might call for the application of a certain oil or pigment to attract love or favor. Cosmetic rituals were sometimes overseen by temple priests or priestesses, especially those serving Ishtar, goddess of love, beauty, and war. In ancient Mesopotamia, beauty was enchantment. Each cosmetic act was a ritual. Each gaze in the mirror, a conversation with the divine. And surrounding rooms points to a culture that valued cleanliness, not just for hygiene, but for spiritual purity. Oils, perhaps scented with local herbs like sandalwood, turmeric, and vetiver, would have been applied before and after bathing to soften skin and calm the senses. Hair was carefully maintained, lightly oiled, and styled into buns or braids. Figurines show women wearing elaborate hairstyles adorned with ornaments. To be beautiful was to evoke the serenity of a plum blossom, the purity of jade, or the grace of a crane in flight. Fair complexions signified wealth and refinement, proof that you did not toil under the sun. Women used rice powder to whiten their faces, often applying it in layers to achieve a smooth, porcelain-like finish. This created a contrast that emphasized delicacy and restraint, a visual whisper of sensuality rather than a shout. Women shaved their natural brows and redrew them with charcoal or black ink. Manuals and scrolls from the Tang and Song dynasties described dozens of distinct eyebrow styles, each with poetic names like willow leaf or distant mountains. Some mixed it with pearl dust or powdered lead, unaware of the long-term health risks. These delicate dots symbolized youth, wealth, or seasonal celebration. Unlike in some ancient societies where cosmetics were confined to elite women, in Mesoamerica, both men and women adorned their bodies with meaning. Women painted their lips with aotiat seeds, which produced a deep crimson tint, while cheeks were colored with crushed cochineal, a brilliant red dye made from insects harvested on cactus. Black and white were used for contrast, contouring the face or framing the eyes with charcoal and powdered lime. Appearance wasn't just about attraction, it was about identity, ritual, and cosmic connection. Across dynasties, from the Han to the Tang, Chinese cosmetics evolved into a refined and poetic ritual and art form, painted onto the human canvas. Wigs were less common than in Egypt, but hairpieces and false braids were used to add volume or display wealth. Scented oils infused with orchid, lotus, or musk were massaged into the skin, while herbal face masks using ginseng or green tea promised clarity and longevity. Beauty wasn't merely cosmetic, it was medicinal, philosophical, even moral. But in terracotta artifacts, delicate tools, and the ghostly shimmer of powdered pigments. Incense burners found in homes and temples hint at the fusion of scent, sanctity, and everyday ritual. Beauty and cleanliness were not separate from spirituality. They were a part of it. In the Indus Valley, cosmetics were quiet symbols, worn not for spectacle, but for balance, identity, and perhaps even love. This style, known as faidan or flying dots, became particularly popular during the Tang dynasty. Women painted delicate red marks on their cheeks and sometimes foreheads, inspired by the colors of nature or the flush of love. Their beauty was deliberate, subtle, and enduring. Though we have no deciphered script to explain their routines, the cosmetic culture of the Indus Valley speaks through its objects quiet, refined, and deeply personal. This rouge was more than cosmetic. It may have signified fertility, spirituality, or marital status. Much like the bindi and later Indian traditions, the color red sacred and vital has always played a central role in South Asian aesthetics, and its origins may stretch as far back as the Indus civilization. These weren't just moisturizers in a dry climate. They were believed to carry divine energy. These weren't just decorative items. They were the tools of daily self-care, suggesting that personal grooming was a consistent and valued part of life. Applying fragrant oils was considered both hygienic and holy, aligning the body with the gods. Oils were extracted from sesame, almonds, and olives, often infused with myrrh, cedarwood, or frankincense. Hair was piled high in complex coils and waves, held in place with pins of ivory, silver, or even gold. Dark kohl was applied to the lids and lashes, not only for aesthetic effect, but as a shield against evil spirits and disease. Charcoal, lead, and crushed minerals were common ingredients mixed into pastes that were stored in small stone jars. The exaggerated eye shapes you see in Mesopotamian statues weren't artistic quirks, they reflected real cosmetic practices. Face creams and skin treatments were recorded on clay tablets. Recipes included crushed date stones, beeswax, and milk to soften and lighten the skin. Clay masks were used to treat blemishes, and scrubs made from salt or ash exfoliated the skin. Hairdressers, or natresses, were essential household staff for the wealthy. In Rome, cosmetics weren't just about beauty, they were about status, ambition, and social theater. Every pigment, every scent, every braid told the world exactly who you were, or who you wanted to be. In the bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, Nineveh beauty was inseparable from magic, medicine, and the divine. Eyes were the focal point of Mesopotamian beauty, much like in Egypt. Grooming manuals weren't uncommon among the elite early examples of beauty advice that blur the line between science and sorcery. Hair was styled with care and complexity. Perhaps most intriguing was the link between beauty and magic. Mesopotamian incantations often referenced beautification. In the ancient cities of the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Laldo beauty left its traces not in written texts among the ruins. Archaeologists have unearthed tiny mirrors made from polished bronze, delicately carved combs, and oval terracotta palettes still dusted with traces of red. One of the most telling discoveries is the widespread use of red pigment, likely derived from hematite or iron oxide, applied to the lips, cheeks, and perhaps the forehead. Bathing was a communal ritual. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro, with its brick-lined steps, some scholars believe the people of the Indus Valley used natural plant dyes like indigo or henna to color hair and decorate the body, precursors to traditions still practiced across the Indian subcontinent today. Fragrance played a role too. Though few written records survive, botanical evidence suggests the use of aromatic resins and herbs. In ancient China, beauty was a reflection of nature, delicate, balanced, and deeply symbolic. Pale skin was the cornerstone of Chinese beauty ideals, much like in other ancient cultures. Blush was applied with care, not in harsh circles, but in soft shades resembling flower petals. Lips, too, were a statement. Red cinnabar pigment was used to tint them in a small heart-like shape, leaving the edges of the lips pale. Eyebrows were art. Styles changed with the dynasty, straight, arched, or curved like the wings of a swallow. Ornamental touches elevated beauty to theatrical levels. Women wore Huadian tiny floral or jewel-like forehead decals made from gold leaf paper or crushed flower petals. Perfume and skincare also played vital roles. In ancient China, to be beautiful was to be in harmony with heaven and earth, a living poem composed of color, scent, and grace. In ancient Mesoamerica, among the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec civilizations, beauty was vibrant, ceremonial, and inseparable from the spiritual world. The Mesoamerican palette came from nature. Red was the most sacred color, symbolizing life, blood, and the sun. Body painting was common and often ritualistic. Dyes and mineral pigments were applied during festivals, warfare, or religious ceremonies. Warriors painted their faces to intimidate enemies and honor the gods. Priests painted their bodies with ash or chalk to purify themselves for sacrifice or ceremony. Aztec noble women used hairpieces, ribbons, and even gold dust to enhance their appearance. Every pigment, flower, and braid was a symbol of bridge between the earthly body and the celestial realm. Men, particularly warriors, styled their hair according to their rank, with shaved patterns or elaborate knots indicating valor in battle. But perhaps the most iconic element of Celtic appearance was woad, the blue dye extracted from the Isidis tinctoria plant. Warriors painted swirling designs across their faces and bodies, not only to intimidate foes in battle, but also for ceremonial or spiritual reasons. Tattoos and body paint may have also had a role in storytelling, marking key life events, tribal affiliations, or spiritual achievements. Animal symbolism was deeply woven into Celtic belief, and it's likely that some body art reflected that connection. While some debate how widespread woad use truly was, classical writers like Julius Caesar certainly thought it terrifying enough to mention. They didn't follow the ornate rituals of Rome or the elegance of Egypt, but their appearance was no less important. And scented oils, often placed carefully within the tomb beside shabby figurines and amulets. Why? Because looking presentable in the afterlife mattered. You were expected to meet the gods looking divine. Mirrors, combs, and cosmetic tools were buried with women, especially among the aristocracy. This wasn't vanity, it was remembrance. These objects told a story about who the deceased had been, refined, admired, connected to the divine order of beauty. Tomb paintings show the deceased wearing full makeup, rouged cheeks, elaborate wigs, eyes lined in perfect black. Beauty was eternal, and cosmetics were as essential as food and water for the journey to the next world. It honored both the earth beneath their feet and the spirits they believed watched from the trees. It's a hidden cathedral of water, vast, brooding, and quiet as a tomb. The system is supported by 336 marble columns, most towering over 9 meters tall, arranged in 12 perfect rows. The ceilings they hold curve gently into vaults, creating the illusion of a cathedral submerged in shadow. Over 300 feet long and 200 feet wide, it once held up to 80,000 cubic meters of water, enough to supply the great palace of Constantinople and surrounding buildings. Locals spoke of houses with mysteriously wet basements. Some even fished from their floors. It wasn't until the 16th century that a curious scholar rediscovered it, guided by tales of water that whispered beneath the earth. In life, they dazzled. In death, they consecrated. Beauty wasn't fleeting, it was forever. Perfumed oils preserved the flesh and masked the smell of decay. But more than that, they elevated the body to a godlike state. The source of this water, the distant Belgrade forest, brought through aqueducts stretching for miles. Roman funerals were public displays of wealth and virtue, and a well-groomed corpse reflected honor on the entire family. The city had been sieged more times than anyone could count, and in times of war, when aqueducts were cut and fountains ran dry, the basilica cistern ensured life continued underground. Elaborate torques, neck rings made from twisted gold or bronze, were worn proudly by both men and women. It suggests that the impulse to beautify and sanctify the body in death is as old as civilization itself. From the embalmed faces of Egyptian mummies to the perfumed bodies prepared for Roman funerals, cosmetics were not merely tools of seduction or status. They were sacred offerings to the divine. Justinian wasn't content with merely preserving Rome's legacy, he wanted to outshine it. Cosmetic substances were believed to have protective properties, warding off demons and ensuring a peaceful passage to the underworld. Death was not an erasure of beauty, but a transformation of it into something cosmic and enduring. Marks of respect for the dead and symbols of a person's identity carried into eternity. Earrings, bracelets, and hairpins added to the visual power. These weren't just accessories. They were badges of strength, lineage, and honor. Cool, echoing, ancient silence. You step down a stone staircase, and the temperature shifts. The air becomes damp, and suddenly the city vanishes, and the basilica cistern swallows you whole. To the Celts, grooming and adornment were signs of vitality, bravery, and tribal identity. And yes, even warriors had favorite combs. Celtic men and women alike paid attention to their looks. Beauty for the Celts wasn't just about seduction. It was about identity. A well-groomed warrior was seen as disciplined, a finely adorned woman as wise and powerful. Bronze combs, razors, and tweezers have been found in burial sites, showing that personal grooming was valued. Tattooing and scarification were also practiced, especially among the Maya. These permanent marks weren't decorative. They were spiritual badges of endurance, dedication, or religious transformation. Even dental cosmetics existed. Elites had jade or turquoise inlays placed into their teeth, signaling status and divine favor. Young women wore subtle marks on their faces during courtship rituals, hinting at readiness for marriage. Perfume and fragrance held divine significance. The Aztecs were obsessed with flowers, zittle, which they used not only in offerings, but also in personal adornment. Fragrant blooms like marigolds, plumeria, and cacao flowers were woven into garlands or crushed into pastes and rubbed onto the skin. Copal, a sacred tree resin, was burned as incense and mixed with oils to scent the body before rituals. Hairstyles were deeply symbolic. Maya women wore long, thick braids coiled at the tops of their heads or twisted into buns, sometimes adorned with jade beads or feathers. For the Mesoamericans, beauty was sacred. In the misty forests and windswept hills of ancient Europe, the Celts cultivated a vision of beauty that was both fierce and earthy, wild yet intentional. Hair was considered sacred, and both sexes often wore it long, wavy, and styled with lime or animal fat for volume and stiffness-giving warriors, that famous spiked or swept-back look that struck fear into their enemies. Jewelry was essential, not just for adornment, but for identity and social rank. Makeup was subtler, but present. Red ochre was used on cheeks and lips, particularly by women of noble status. Mirrors polished bronze discs with decorated backs were found in graves of elite women, suggesting that self-presentation held both social and ritual weight. In the Celtic world, beauty was raw, elemental, and filled with pride. Across ancient civilizations, beauty didn't end with life. It extended into death. In ancient Egypt, this belief was especially vivid. The dead were buried with their makeup palettes, coal containers. The Romans, too, took grooming seriously in death. Elite Romans prepared their bodies with myrrh, cinnamon, and spikenard. Among the Greeks, rites included washing the body, dressing it in fine robes, and adorning it with oils and garlands. In Mesopotamia, oils and incense were used to anoint the dead as part of sacred ritual. Even in prehistoric burials, red ochre has been found sprinkled over bodies, possibly symbolic of blood, rebirth, or vitality. Across cultures and centuries, cosmetics bridged the mortal and the divine. Beneath the chaotic rhythm of Istanbul, the calls to prayer, the fairy horns on the Bosphorus, the footsteps of tourists rushing between mosques and markets, there is silence. Built in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian the Great, the basilica cistern known in Turkish as Yerebeytun Sarnek is the largest surviving underground water reservoir from the Byzantine Empire. But this wasn't just a utilitarian tank. No, the Byzantines built even their water storage with ambition. Reflections ripple beneath your feet. It feels as if you've stepped into the underworld, lit only by the glint of water and the occasional flickering spotlight. Water in Constantinople was survival. For centuries, it was forgotten. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, the cistern slipped from public memory, its entrances sealed, its purpose lost. Today it stands not just as a monument to Byzantine ingenuity, but as a surreal echo of a world that once ruled the known earth, a place where time seems to drip slowly from the ceiling and the ghosts of emperors walk silently between the columns. To understand the Basilica Cistern, you have to understand its creator, Emperor Justinian the Great, ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th century. He built cathedrals, courts, walls, and aqueducts, a stone and mortar declaration that Constantinople was the new Rome. Beneath the city's foundation, he built a marvel no one would see, the Basilica Cistern. Construction began around 532 CE, shortly after the Nika riots burned half the city to the ground. Reusing columns wasn't just economical, it was symbolic. Justinian was literally building a new empire on the ruins of the old. Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian capitals sit side by side, reminders that Rome's grandeur had been inherited, reshaped, and submerged beneath Constantinople. In the smoldering aftermath, Justinian commissioned a new underground water reservoir that would not only supply his rebuilt imperial palace, but also withstand siege and fire. A forest of stone rises around you, 336 marble columns arranged in perfect rows, the reflections shimmering across black water. The silence is only broken by the occasional drip from the ceiling, echoing like the breath of the past. Most importantly, the cistern was fed by the Valens and Hadrian aqueducts, some stretching over 19 kilometers from the Belgrade forest. Their capitals range from Ionic scrolls to Corinthian leaves, and a few seem entirely improvised. That is because many of these columns were spolia architectural or sculptural pieces recycled from earlier Roman and Greek ruins. It's a mosaic of empires within one structure, as if the gods of old temples had been exiled to this damp underworld. One is laid sideways, the other rests upside down. No inscriptions, no explanations, just two ancient faces staring out from under the water as if waiting for someone to ask the right question. There were no triumphal arches or gilded mosaics, just quiet, dark utility, a subterranean heartbeat beneath the city's grandeur. Scholars believe the heads were likely taken from a remong, temple or public building, and reused here as column bases during construction in the 6th century. They are masterpieces of Roman stonework, detailed, expressive, and disturbingly lifelike. And yet here they sit, submerged in silence, repurposed into structural filler. Whether you believe in myths or not, their presence is undeniable. You don't just look at Medusa in the Basilica Cistern. You feel her watching you back. Others whisper of deeper symbolism. Medusa was, after all, a symbol of rebellion, of the monstrous feminine, of power feared and punished. The city was famed for its towering walls, its gold-covered churches, its imperial courts. But without water, it was nothing more than a gilded coffin. The Basilica Cistern wasn't just a marvel of architecture. It was a military asset, hidden beneath the city's foundations. In an era when cities could die of thirst, that was revolutionary. It served as a silent lifeline during times of siege, drought, and disaster. In Byzantine theology and imperial iconography, water represented life, rebirth, and divine favor. The basilica, with its forest of columns and eerie grandeur, was a quiet cathedral to resilience. To control it, especially during a siege, was to show that God still smiled upon the city. To place her beneath the feet of the empire literally may have been a quiet political message, sculptural act of domination, or perhaps the opposite, a secret rebellion carved into stone, hidden away in the underworld of Constantinople. The city endured countless sieges. One of the most devastating was the Arab siege of 717 to 718 CE, where food and water supplies were stretched thin for over a year. The Basilica Cistern, with its massive capacity, helped sustain the palace and nearby districts through these long, desperate days. The marble, soaked in centuries of moisture, glows faintly under the cistern's dim lighting yellow, gray, and pink tones flickering across the stone like candlelight trapped in water. A system of elevated aqueducts, most notably the Valens Aqueduct, delivered water to the city, which was then stored in open-air cisterns and covered structures like this one. The fact that one head is sideways and the other upside down has puzzled historians for centuries. Some say it was purely practical a way to make the blocks fit beneath the columns, but the Byzantines were too careful, too symbolic for that to be the only reason. Even after her death, her image became a patrope meant to ward off evil. She appeared on shields, coins, and doorways. Could her presence here have been protective? Was she placed in the cistern not to punish, but to safeguard the sacred water below the city? And yet, For all its silence, it was a lifeline, an emperor's answer to chaos and collapse. The Tear Column, also called the Weeping Column, is covered in swirling engravings resembling peacock eyes or teardrops. Their arrangement created symmetry and balance, a Byzantine obsession rooted in both Roman engineering and Christian cosmology. Even in a structure few were meant to see, aesthetic order mattered. The Byzantines understood that beauty and function were never separate. Some believe it was carved to honor the slaves who died during the cistern's construction. Legend says that if the column drips on you, it brings good luck, a somber myth for a place already heavy with memory. It whispered one message through every brick. Rome still lived, just deeper underground. This ensured the cistern could store vast reserves ready for drought, fire, or siege. Roots once crept through cracks in the ceiling. Bats nested in the arches. Time, like water, wore everything smooth. Today, walking between these columns feels like drifting through a dream, as if the world above has forgotten something sacred that continues to wait in the dark. It was both a precaution and a political statement. Constantinople would never thirst, and the emperor would never falter. The system was built on the site of a former basilica, hence the name, and required enormous resources. Thousands of laborers, including prisoners of war, carved out a space nearly the size of a cathedral beneath the city. The result was an underground reservoir measuring 138 by 64 meters, supported by 336 columns, many of them reused or spolia, taken from older Roman and Greek temples. The engineering was astonishing. Vaulted ceilings distributed weight evenly. Brick walls were waterproofed with thick layers of mortar. Arched supports prevented collapse. But the true brilliance of the cistern is its invisibility. It did not boast, it hid. The public never saw it. Step inside the basilica cistern, and you don't feel like you've entered a reservoir. You feel like you've stumbled into a forgotten temple. These columns aren't uniform. That's part of what makes them so haunting. Some are smooth, others fluted. Most columns stand around 9 meters tall, supporting brick arches that make the entire chamber feel like a submerged cathedral. Among these pillars, two stand out for their eerie artistry: the Tear Column and the Medusa columns. The placement of the columns, 12 rows of 28, wasn't random. Over the centuries, algae and mineral buildup have softened the lines of the columns. In the far northwest corner of the basilica cistern, tucked beneath two marble columns, lie the most enigmatic relics of the entire structure: two massive stone Medusa heads. Where did they come from? No one knows for certain. It's as if the serpent-haired Gorgon had been exiled into the damp to hold up the weight of the empire she once defied. More compelling theories suggest the positioning was intentional to neutralize Medusa's power, a way of defanging the myth, rendering her petrifying gaze harmless underground. In Greek mythology, Medusa's head was used by Perseus as a weapon. Visitors today still pause in front of the Medusas. The hush in the air seems heavier near them. In ancient Constantinople, water meant survival. The Byzantine capital was under constant threat, surrounded by enemies for centuries: Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Crusaders. While aqueducts could be cut or poisoned, the system's sealed underground storage, stocked in advance, ensured that Constantinople did not fall. Its water was channeled in from the Belgrade forest, located over 19 kilometers away. The basilica cistern stood out because it was both covered and underground, protected from heat, sunlight, and contamination. But water was more than just tactical, it was symbolic. This is why so many of Constantinople's systems were not only functional, but beautifully constructed. Even during the Ottoman conquest in 1453, while the city above was burning and falling, the waters of the cistern below remained calm. After the conquest, it was largely forgotten, sealed off, and unused, but during those final Byzantine years, it had served its purpose. Today, As tourists wander between its columns, few realize they are walking atop one of the most crucial defenses of an empire. Not a sword or a wall, but something far more precious: silence, water, and time. The Ottomans, brilliant engineers in their own right, built new aqueducts and fountains that served the growing city above. The ancient Byzantine waterworks, tucked underground, unmarked and dim, faded from collective memory. No one advertised the system, no plaques, no maps, no fanfare, just still water beneath the stones. For nearly a century after the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, in 1453, the Basilica cistern lay in silence. It remained mostly hidden, used occasionally as a water source, but left in semi-obscurity. The Ottoman Empire had its own monumental projects to focus on. And step into the Basilica cistern, they don't just encounter a historical ruin, they enter a living monument. It's a space where architecture, atmosphere, and memory blur together. Lighting was carefully chosen to highlight the graceful curves of the columns and reflect them in the dark water below. The result: an atmosphere that feels more like an underground cathedral than a reservoir. The Basilica cistern has appeared in films like From Russia with Love and Inferno, and in countless documentaries and music videos. Children lower their voices, tourists slow their pace. Even the most distracted traveler stops to stare at the Medusa heads, half submerged and brooding in the shadows. Modern light shows play with the reflections on the water, turning the chamber into a pool of color and sound. It is paradoxically more alive now than ever, a space once hidden, now illuminated with new meaning. There's something magnetic about this place. It doesn't ask for reverence. It quietly demands it. It's not just a historical site, it's a stage. Lit by amber lights and filled with the soft sound of dripping water, the system feels more like a sacred ritual than a tourist stop. It ripples and reflects light, dances across its surface, breaking the symmetry of the columns. The system reflects not just light, but history, identity, and myth. In this, there's a kind of sacred theater. This one was a relic, beautiful, yes, but buried in the past. When Turkish authorities decided to restore and reopen the Basilica cistern in the late 20th century, they found a flooded ruin filled with centuries of mud, algae, and decay. Baptism, the most essential Christian ritual, was a watery transition from death to life, sin to purity. The way light filters through columns, the hush of footsteps echoing across water, the slow drip from a ceiling that seems to breathe. It waits like water, like history. While the Basilica cistern wasn't used for religious ceremony, its aura evokes that same liminal space. You descend into the earth and encounter darkness, then light, then silence. It feels like passing through a ritual unspoken, but undeniably sacred. Tourists instinctively whisper. Even the click of a camera shutter seems too loud. It stands proudly among Istanbul's top destinations, a haunting yet majestic reminder that the city's true heart beats not just in its minarets and mosques, but deep beneath the ground. The columns were stained, the floor invisible beneath water and sediment. It served not only as infrastructure, but as symbolic assurance. The emperor's court was not built on dry foundations, but on flowing, living water. You walk through it. You breathe it in. Beneath every throne, a river. Beneath every law, reflection. But in the subtle shifts of light, the quiet splashes, and the performances that occasionally bring this space roaring back to life, artists and architects treat it as a canvas, a sacred space where history is not locked in glass, but is part of the atmosphere. And in the silence, you hear it, the echo. Every footstep, every whisper, every drop of water reverberates through the stone like a chant from another world. It's haunting, beautiful, timeless. At the same time, care has been taken not to strip away the very things that make it otherworldly. The soft lighting, the cool air, the low hum of dripping water. You're in Byzantium, in Constantinople, in a shadow world that never really left. But the bones were still solid. The structure had survived earthquakes, fires, wars, and abandonment, all while holding its ceiling high. Water represented divine mercy in Islam, Rama, and architectural water features reminded the faithful of paradise. It would take centuries more before the system was drained, cleaned, and opened as a historical monument. And yet the system refused to be forgotten. Locals in the neighborhood around Hagia Sophia began to report strange things. Some said their basements were damp year-round, no matter the season. What he discovered astounded him. A subterranean space larger than many cathedrals in Europe, filled with columns, dark water, and dripping echoes. He rode through the cistern by candlelight, sketching and measuring its dimensions, noting the carved capitals and mysterious Medusa heads. Galice's writings introduced the Basilica Cistern to the wider world, a lost wonder of the Byzantine, preserved beneath the Ottoman capital, and traveler sent to Constantinople by King Francis II to study ancient texts and monuments. Galice had a habit of asking too many questions. When he heard about locals pulling up water and fish from the floors of their homes, he began investigating. Others claimed they could drop buckets through holes in their floors and pull up cold, fresh water. A few even claimed they were catching fish underground, a bizarre, quiet miracle happening right below the bustling Ottoman streets. It wasn't until the 1540s that the system was formally rediscovered by the curious eyes of Petrus Galice, a French scholar. Eventually, he found an entrance likely through a private home and descended into the murky depths. Yet even after his discovery, the system wasn't restored or open to the public. But thanks to a curious French scholar and a few rumor-spreading locals, the silent system stirred once more, no longer forgotten, but waiting to rise from the depths. Today, when visitors descend the dim stairway near Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, it wasn't always this way. After extensive cleaning and restoration, walkways were installed just above the water level. It's no coincidence that some call it the Sunken Palace. It's no wonder filmmakers and artists have flocked to the space. Visitors are often caught off guard by how emotional the space feels. In recent years, the cistern has also hosted art installations, concerts, and exhibitions. From imperial utility to artistic sanctuary, the Basilica Cistern has risen again, not with fire or conquest, but with silence, water, and light. In a city that has seen empires rise and fall, water has remained Istanbul's oldest and quietest witness. The Basilica Cistern, more than just a storage vault, holds centuries of symbolism, not only as a resource, but as a spiritual and philosophical presence. The Byzantines and later the Ottomans understood that water was never just about hydration. It was about purification, power, and the thin veil between worlds. Water in the system moves slowly. It does not rush, and it does not speak. The stillness forces you to look inward like a mirror. In Byzantine theology, water played a central role in rebirth. Some scholars argue that the location of the cistern near the Hagia Sophia and the Great Palace was no accident. The Ottomans, too, revered water. Their gardens, palaces, and mosques were designed around fountains and pools. The Basilica Cistern may have been a Byzantine creation, but it fit quietly into Ottoman cosmology. Cool, hidden, and eternally flowing. And then there's the psychological symbolism. Walking through the system evokes more than awe, it whispers memory. It is a space that doesn't rush to reveal itself. Today, the Basilica Cistern is no longer hidden. Millions descend its steps every year, not just to learn about ancient hydraulics, but to feel the weight of time pressing gently from the walls. In a city bursting with noise and movement, the system is one of the few places where silence dominates. And yet, there is life here, not just in the steady flow of visitors. Over the last 2 decades, the system has hosted art exhibits, laser shows, classical music concerts, and sound installations that merge past and present. You don't observe the Basilica Cistern from a distance. Restoration efforts have been delicate but vital. The columns have been cleaned, structural supports reinforced, and walkways improved to allow better access. It remains an engineering marvel, yes, but also a reminder that infrastructure can be beautiful, even mystical. While the modern world debates utility versus aesthetics, the Byzantine created a water tank as elegant as a cathedral. That contradiction still stuns visitors today. Above ground, Istanbul pulses with new energy. Modern trams glide past ancient sites, and street vendors sell roasted chestnuts beside Roman ruins. Yet directly below it all lies the Basilica Cistern unmoved, unmother, eternal. It holds the stories of emperors, architects, invaders, and dreamers, all now echoes in the damp stone. In the Basilica Cistern, time doesn't feel linear. It loops like water circling in a basin. Past and present meet in silence, and for a moment, you're not just in Istanbul.